please feel free to take up your seats down here. So before we get going, I think so Abby, I'm wandering around everywhere, aren't I? Before we get going, just want to share, we actually had over 200 people register for this evening workshop, which is fantastic. And we had the sad job of basically saying to everybody, well, at least about 140 of those, that we didn't have space in this venue. But what we were going to do was going to live stream this evening. So I am known for my bad language, and so I'm under strict instructions not to swear. So if you are asking any questions, please keep the language clean, if that's okay. Do not follow my lead, because I normally break my rules. But it's pretty exciting, and then we're great that everybody logging in can join us as well. Please feel free to take up these seats down here. All right. So I think everybody's settled. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. We've got a wonderful workshop. We're very pleased to have the support of our partners, IDA, in helping us together grow this exciting platform, the Data Innovation Challenge, enabled by Dextra. We're pleased to welcome this evening Prudential, who is going to be talking about a very, very exciting and I think groundbreaking Data Innovation Challenge focused on the healthcare space. As well as we'd like to thank Tableau and Pat in particular, and I'll introduce you formally later, for speaking with us, as well as Olswang for not only allowing Elle to talk about some really exciting data issues, but also being our kind host this evening. And I think you have to admit the view is amazing, right? And thank you so much for the space, and thank you so much for being very patient with all the fire security officers about how many people we can have here. That's okay. But it's great to be here. So just to flick through on the agenda, I'm only supposed to take about a few minutes, so I've got a couple of quick updates for you. Then I'll be welcoming Pat to talk to us, and then we'll have Q&A session. So we'll be taking about 3 or 4 questions, I think, which I'll be moderating. Then we'll be inviting David from Prudential to kind of talk about the challenge, and then we'll close out with Elle from Olswang talking about data law in Asia. After that, everybody's really encouraged to hang out, chat, make new friends, and basically just network on that side. So, a couple of things. Anybody here, is this the first time you've been to a Dextra workshop? Put your hands up if you can. Great. Oh, fantastic. Okay. So, I mean, just in case you don't know what Dextra is all about, we're building this Data Innovation Challenge platform, and it's all about encouraging collaboration within the community, the different stakeholders, from end users to scientists to data owners to developers of exciting tools and platforms to really work together to see if we can harness the true value of data. Loads of fantastic insights, application services and businesses that can be developed, particularly and grown out of here in Singapore. And to support that, we've been working really hard to build a community of data scientists, and I'll talk about data specialists, and I'll talk about that community a little bit more in a second. Those data specialists compete for online data innovation challenges. And these are challenges that are put forward by lead users, be them from the public or the private sector, to really see if we can source great insights, observations, models, etc. And what we've been doing is we've been taking the online model and then bringing it offline. So the top teams then have the opportunity to physically get together and actually share their insights with the lead users in person. And actually the top teams then get invited to co-collaborate again and see if they can build on what they've already done. And that's been a really exciting dynamic. We've done a lot of work in what we call capacity building workshops, and here's a great example of this evening, and we're going to be doing a lot more of these. And then finally, we do a lot of hackathons, right, and invitation events where everybody gets together and works on things. So that's the pillars of our Data Innovation Challenge platform enabled by Dextra. I've already discussed basically the different components, but I just wanted to highlight Dex, which is effectively, sorry, I'll come back to that in a second. But in the context of our community, I'm pleased to share, latest numbers, the community has now grown here in Singapore to over 850 people, and that's in the last 6 months. With a real mixed concentration in terms of data and business analysts and data scientists, but also great representation from the C-suite, which for me is wonderful because it's showing how, how important data science and data analytics and business analytics is becoming today. We've also been working hard on building our data marketplace, and last weekend, for the first time at our recent hackathon, this data marketplace was available for those who participated. And this is where we put all of the data that we've been collecting and using and have permission to share. We're able to share it with those participants. And we're going to build and work on this data marketplace. So dex.sg, if you haven't been there, please go and register, and you'll get access to exciting data sets from both the public, private, and the people sector. It really is a kind of world first. And we're incredibly proud to have the support of the IDA, EDB, and different government agencies, plus the private sector, to make this happen. So, last weekend, I'm pleased to share that Team Vive were one of our Data Innovation Challenge winners. And what they basically did was they took a lot of telco data, and they were able to look at that data and analyze it and see what they could learn from that data in the context of business travelers and what they were doing as and when they visited Singapore. And that was cool stuff, and so we're proud to announce them as winners last weekend. And the final big bit of news I want to share is that we're building a centre of innovation, an actual physical home for all of the community. Be those community of urban innovators, people really working hard to see if they can help improve the vibrancy of the city, the intelligence of the city, but also a home for our data scientists and business analysts. So we can actually physically come together on a regular basis, these capacity building workshops. And this Centre of Innovation is going to be in the heart of Chinatown. I'll give you the address, I think I've got this right, it's 237. And we've actually got about 6,000 square foot of space. We're going to put a massive big pipe in there and loads of toys. And as I said, it's a co-working space, it's a learning space, and for young, exciting businesses, it's a place that you'll actually be able to hang out, work, get incubated, and get support and access to capital. And it's really cool. And we've been working quite hard to make this happen. So that's going to be available from the 1st of April, all being well. Yeah. The little secret about it is that probably quite a few of you have been there before. It used to be a club. It used to be a bar, a club. Yeah. And so we've got it. URA just reclassified the area so clubs could really operate past 12 o'clock anymore, midnight, and so we were able to work with them to take the space. So trust me, the alcohol smells and all that kind of stuff has been aired and it's all gone away. And it's just ripe for great innovation. But that's that there. And we'll be having our first hackathon in Chinatown at the end of March. So 200 people will be expecting to be cranking away, doing loads of great stuff. So that's my update, which hopefully I did in less than 5 minutes. Back to our schedule. Okay, we're running 4 minutes of hand. And what I'd really like to do now is introduce to you Pat Hanrahan. Pat is the co-founder and chief scientist of Tableau software. He'll be speaking to us today about tools for data scientists. Pat has worked at Pixar, where he developed volume rendering software and was the chief architect of RenderMan Interface, a protocol that allows modeling programs to describe scenes to high-quality rendering. Pat has received 3 Academy Awards. It's pretty awesome, actually. A round of applause, please. That's pretty awesome. 3 Academy Awards for Science and Technology. Also, the Spirit of America Creativity Award, the Signograph Computer Graphics Achievement Award, the Signograph Stephen A. Cons Award, and the IEEE Visualization Career Award. Excuse the language, that's fucking awesome. Just a round of applause, please. Okay, so with his current research involving visualization, image synthesis, graphic systems, and architectures, we're looking forward to listening to you and learning. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Can you hear me? Is it on? Okay, great. Well, this is really a privilege to be here, and thanks for that great introduction, and thanks all of you for coming. I'm really excited to hear. I didn't know when I came here about all this exciting activity in data science, and I didn't know about Dextra, so this is just fantastic news to see that Singapore is so excited about possibilities of data. So, so I'm going to talk about actually a little slightly different tweak on the original title, which was called The Value of Visualization. I'm going to call it instead Tools for Data Enthusiasts. It's a similar theme, but I thought you might enjoy this a little bit more. So Dextra is actually an example of this idea of cultivating data scientists. And I could have picked your team, what was it, Viva, as an example of this. But many of you probably have seen like the Netflix Prize and the Netflix Prize team. And then of course you may know about in the United States there were these quants, and the quants were the guys that sort of did data science for Wall Street. They were the people that sort of originally figured out how to predict stock prices. And the typical data scientist, as maybe exemplified by this team here, is they tend to have, say, PhDs in applied math or statistics. Sometimes they have extraordinary computer hacking skills. Maybe they write Hadoop jobs or write programs that run on large data centers. Sometimes they do artificial intelligence or AI. But they're extremely specialized people, and a lot of the emphasis has been on building tools for them and training these kind of specialized people, and there's an important role for them. But I think there's even a broader class of users of data, what I call data enthusiasts. And here's an example of some customers that we have at Tableau. One of our customers is eBay, and eBay, they have all these like markets. Like they have a market for dolls and a market for coins and maybe a market for old radios. And say you have this person that's running the market for dolls. Well, she's a doll collector, right? She doesn't have a PhD in statistics or applied mathematics, but she knows a lot about dolls. And at eBay, the management decided that everybody that runs one of these markets has to be very aware of what's going on in their market. And if somebody asks them about their market, they have to look at the data and be able to tell them what happened. And so she might notice that the price of vintage Barbie dolls suddenly increased one day. And somebody might flag that and say, why is that happening? And she has to figure it out. Like, is there fraud going on? Is maybe something happened in the world where demand for Barbie dolls made her a collector that became active? And so this person who's, just a sort of a smart person that knows about dolls is looking at that and answering questions like that. Another company in the U.S. that's been very data-oriented is Zynga. Some of you probably play, Farmville. But they revolutionized the games because they made all their game designers and game producers look at how people played the game. So what they would do is they'd literally every day get data about what was happening in the game, and they would try to improve the game. And they literally would come up with a new version of the game once per day. And they would optimize it for gameplay, but they would also optimize it so they got a lot of revenue. In the case of Zynga, they would buy virtual goods, and so they would, try to encourage people to buy virtual goods. So, this is these are sort of non-standard users of data, if you like. Those are examples in business. I mean, I think business is where a lot of this is happening, but in other areas of society, now doctors are looking at data. We work with a Seattle Children's Hospital, and every surgeon there gets data about which patients are returned to the hospital. For example, if you do a surgery and one surgeon causes trouble with their patients and they're always returning to the hospital, they will get data about that, and the chief surgeon will actually know that as well, and so they're expected to improve their performance or figure out what they're doing wrong. And then, of course, in the U.S., there's a big problem with schools, where schools sometimes have high dropout rates. So there's a school district in the United States that actually has the lowest dropout rate in the country, and teachers and principals now are looking at that every day, like attendance data and score data, test score data, trying to keep these students in school, like seeing is there some early warning sign where that child might leave the school. And I could go on and on with these examples, but these people that work with data are really not the traditional data scientists. So I've been using the word data enthusiast for them. I use the word enthusiast because they're sort of a little bit early adopters. Not everybody does but I think they're going to be really common. There are people with questions, right? The doctor is very interested in what happens to his patients, and he wants to know the answer to that question. Some statistician isn't going to ask that question about his patient. And they're on a mission, right? That doctor is really interested in improving healthcare, okay? And they're very passionate about that. In fact, they're passionate about it because they think with data, they can become a better surgeon, right? They can find out what maybe they're doing wrong with the data that they wouldn't find out through other ways. So they really want to be a better surgeon, and they're going to look at the data to do that. You know, so they have a deep understanding of the business or their occupation. They tend to be excellent analytical thinkers, right? Teachers and doctors, for example, are good analytical thinkers, but they're not programmers and not statisticians. And I claim that for every one of these data scientists, there's going to be like 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 of these people. And more generally, I have this quote, which is one of my favorite quotes about what's going on in the big data movement. But it's by Hal Varian, who's the chief economist at Google and has popularized a lot of the data. But this first paragraph is really worth reading because I think this is what's going to happen. The ability to take data, to be able to understand it, to process it, to extract value from it, to visualize it, to communicate it, is going to be a hugely important skill in the next decade. Not only at the professional level, but all educational levels, from elementary school kids to college kids. And why is that? Because now we really do have essentially free and ubiquitous data. So the scarce factor is the ability to understand that data and extract value. See, to me, big data is really about ubiquitous data. All the really large data sets get all the attention. But when you have large data sets, you have small data sets. You have this long tail. And data, when it flows into an organization, it may accumulate somewhere and be big, but then it tends to flow out. And eBay, they collect all their transactions, then the data flows out to the individual managers of the different stores. And so we're going to get free and ubiquitous data. And then the question is, how do we train people to use that data? And how, I guess at Tableau, we feel, what tools should we build for these people that use the data? So that seems to be a really big challenge that we have right now. So I just mentioned this, I grabbed this paragraph if you want to read it, but a lot of people, when they learn data analysis, they learn it from statisticians. But statisticians are just a part of the story here. It's not the whole story. And in fact, what I've been doing at Stanford this year, I'm actually on leave, is I'm actually trying to put together a course on data analysis that we would teach Stanford undergraduates, teach the Stanford undergraduates. And I just to tell you a couple of different things about it. First is I think data analysis falls under this broader thing called analytical thinking, which maybe seems sort of basic, but I actually think you have to have good analytical thinking skills to be a good data analysis person. And I actually think my job as a professor is actually to teach people to think, you know, with different ways of thinking. But anyways, here's my definition. Maybe this compare it to yours, but I think analytical thinking is a structured approach to answering questions and making decisions based on facts and data. It's maybe not too controversial, but let me just go through it for a second. A structured approach means it's not random search. You don't just get a data and just start randomly visualizing and flying through it. That's not going to lead anywhere. You've got to be, you know, rigorous, and you have to develop methodologies for processing data and analytics. You want to answer a question. You want to start with questions. That's really important because, you know, it's like the scientific method where you have a hypothesis. So in our case, we'll call the hypothesis the question. You're curious about something, okay, and you want to find out an answer to a question. You want to get decision making involved in this because the analysis you do, okay, depends on the decisions you make. That doctor, if they're making a decision about somebody's life, about some treatment, that's a very serious decision. That Netflix prize team that's just recommending a movie, that's not a serious decision. You can use completely different techniques for recommending movies than you can for advising people about their medical care. And then, of course, based on facts and data, I think we all assume that's important. But, you know, you have to put this in some perspective. I don't think the world is generally run based on facts and data these days. Maybe in Singapore, but not in the United States. So it's mostly hunches. It's, opinions. It's who has the power. It's not based on rational decision making using the data. So I think every one of these aspects of this is really important. And when you talk about big data or data analysis or analytical thinking, you need to think about all these and more things. So if you're going to be a data analyst or an analyst, who you emulate? I think you emulate Sherlock Holmes. Why? Because he's a detective. He's an investigator. If you're going to answer a question and figure out something, you got to act like an investigator or a detective. You got to track down that criminal. You got to have the drive to do it. Okay, that's really important. People are good data analysts. They want to solve the problem. Okay, they're just not doing it because it's fun. They're interested in getting that criminal. And Sherlock Holmes has great quotes. I read his books pretty regularly, but he sort of epitomized to me what some investigative analyst would do. This quote: "It's a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts." Right? This maybe seems obvious to us, but again, it's back to facts and reason. It's easy to have a theory about something, but is that reality? Let's get some information, get some facts. Second, data. I can't make bricks without things, right? What a great quote. And think of Sherlock Holmes. He has this magnifying glass, and he's wandering around looking for clues, right? He's trying to find data. Just think how much work it is for him to find that data. He has to, work like crazy. Half the stories are about him finding the data. And back to that quote I started with, that now we have a lot of data. I wonder what Sherlock Holmes would, think of nowadays if he was just surrounded by data all the time. He'd put aside his magnifying glass. He might, maybe he'd enjoy it. I don't know. But even if he did, if he had all the data, he'd go still look for some more. So part of that, data investigation is, somebody just doesn't hand you a data set. I actually don't like people handing me data sets. When I teach visualization analysis, I make people go get the data. You got to go get it. You might not go collect it, but you have to find it, look at it. So, anyways, so here's some of the things I think you need to do if you're interested in analytical thinking and data analysis. You have to learn how to pose questions. I keep coming back to this question thing, but I think it's the most important thing in some ways. When I think of, again, back to I'm a teacher too. If you're a grad student of mine, what I tell you the first day, I'm going to teach you how to ask the right question. Anybody can answer a question. The really smart people can ask the right question. But anyway, then you have these more practical things like getting the data, verifying it, normalizing it, joining it with other data. All of these are quite complex steps. Then you get more into the simple analysis, look for patterns, relationships, summarize it, confirm hypotheses, and analyze error. That's the classic statistic. Communicate findings with others, which is not normally emphasized very much, and then make decisions and act. But I could drill down to all these things, but I think you sort of get the idea. You really need to know a lot of different things in order to be a good analyst these days. So anyway, this is sort of each week I sort of cover one of these topics. Okay, so I just want to end. I did say I was going to talk a little bit about visualization. So just to preface this for a second, I think if you're going to build tools for these kinds of people, they have to be highly interactive visual. Just they don't know how to program, they're not going to type in scripts. So you want interactive tools. And I've been very interested in how people use visualization and how to build visual interfaces. And I just want to tell you what I think is the single most important thing about it, which has been researched most famously by a guy named Herb Simon and is still Barkin. But it starts with this, a picture is worth 10,000 words, which we all have heard, I'm sure. But he has a paper, and this is the actual title of his paper. I recommend you read it. Why is a picture worth 10,000 words? And then he put sometimes in there, which is sort of a hint. Picture might not always be worth 10,000 words. So this is actually the crux of the matter, because if you know how pictures work, if you know how people use pictures to think, then you can design good visualization. And in fact, you can design good interactive visualizations because they just augment this process of using pictures to think. So this is pretty important paper, and I should mention this paper is actually, just to encourage you to read it. This paper is very accessible, easy to read, and it's been voted one of the 10 greatest papers in cognitive science of all time. It's the only one involving visualization, I think. So it's really quite a landmark thing. But anyway, I'm going to show you sort of an example which is motivated by this paper, which is very simple, but I hope gives you sort of a sense of what he found out in this research. So you've all seen a table like this. And the first thing you'd expect the visualization person to say is, this is a bad visualization. I'm going to tell you this is a good visualization. So if you ask this question, how much mint tea was sold in the West? Okay, so you can figure that out pretty quickly, right? The columns are different regions. So you see they're in alphabetical order, so it's fairly easy to find West because it's at the end of the alphabet. So you can scan through that very rapidly. Similarly, for mint tea, you can see there's 2 tea categories, and then mint is one of them. And then you intersect those 2 lines, and you find what's worth $4,328. Now, you say, well, that wasn't so great, but the neat thing about it was you didn't have to look at all the numbers. Just you use the headers to quickly find the data. Now, so and what Simon did is he said you actually have an algorithm in your brain for figuring this out. You have a search algorithm. You scan the headers and you scan the columns. And in fact, this is actually recursive. It's a hierarchy, so it's like log n time to home in on this. So he said this takes like log n time to look up that number. Simon would say. And you say this is pretty efficient. He called this an efficient representation of the data, given that you wanted to do this task of answering that question. So that's actually a pretty good way. And if you want to look up a number, there's nothing better than a table. But if you just take the same table and just tweak the question a little bit, what product in what region sold the most? Okay. Does anybody know how to answer that question? Right, what are you doing? You're basically scanning the whole table. You have to look through the whole table, and if this table doesn't even have it, nobody's even shoved it up yet, right? You found it? Nobody's found it yet. You can scan it and make a mistake. But I think it's Colombian coffee. Colombian coffee at least. So the reason that this is not so easy is, I said, you scan it, but as you scan, you're also doing 2 other things. You have to remember what the max is, which occupies your brain. And second, you might end up, you have to subtract, you have to compare the next number with the current one, so you're constantly doing this arithmetic in your head. And in fact, you're likely to either forget the previous max or do the arithmetic wrong. And in fact, that means you start over or get the wrong answer. So it's actually worse than scanning all the things. So this is a really bad representation for this particular task. Now, if we just flip it around, same data, and just make it a bar chart, we can do this in constant time, because this is pre-attentive. Finding the largest value is instantaneous. So what Simon, this Simon, he was a really brilliant guy. He won a Nobel Prize for economics for his work on decision making, and he won the Turing Award in computer science for realizing that you apply artificial intelligence techniques to it. And this was sort of typical of the way he would think. He would thought the mind was sort of a special mental computer, but you could analyze what it did. And when you understood what it did, you could design things that worked well with the mind. That was sort of his, that'll get you a Nobel Prize. That idea will get you a Nobel Prize in the Turing Award. And so he got fascinated with visualization because he wanted to know how our mind processed these visualizations. So this is, it may seem like a trivial example, but this is the heart of the matter. And so this is the value of visualization. I just want to mention this, and I use the value of visualization here to say this in the strongest possible way. Because almost whenever I give a talk or go somewhere, somebody thinks visualization is just pretty pictures. I don't know if anybody's ever heard something like that or thinks that. If you think that or heard it, you should question it, because there is undeniable evidence that with the right picture, human performance can be improved dramatically, a factor of 100 to 1. In fact, that example I showed you, if I could just time you, I could say, look up that maximum value and ask it how long it took. And you could show that in the bar chart, it was instantaneous. The other one, literally, I could give you a table and it could take you minutes. And that's a factor of 100. In fact, I can almost make it arbitrarily large, you know. If I make the right representation, I can improve your performance enormously. This is not disputed by psychology. This is a fact, you know. And so you can measure this, and there's like thousands of papers. You can show you can do it faster, you can make fewer errors, and you can comprehend it better. Now, there's one gotcha here. Is it doesn't say that. There's one other subtlety. It turns out that almost any visual representation is better than no visual representation. Like imagine, like I don't know if let's say you play chess. I used to play chess a lot. And I used to play blindfold chess. Blindfold chess is a lot harder than regular chess. So, but the reason chess you have pieces is because you can look at the pieces and remember where they are. You don't have to remember them. I should say you can see where they are. You don't have to remember them. So a visualization of almost any form is better than no visualization because you can't keep all the information in your head. But if you have two visualizations, like the bar chart versus the table, then one might be better than the other. And I'll claim they're both visualizations because my definition is if you can see it, it's a visualization. You know, a lot of people don't think that, but that's my definition. So you can make a good visualization, but you could also choose a bad visualization. And that's where people go wrong, is they make random visualizations that aren't very good. And when they make a bad visualization, then it works really badly. So you make a graph and you make a giant hairball with 10,000 nodes on a graph, you get a giant hairball, that's a bad visualization. That will slow people down and not be effective. So you got to be able to choose the right visualization. And that's where the craft of the field comes in. And in our software, we spend an enormous amount of time trying to sort of encode best practices in there so that if we know what you're doing, then we can often choose a better visualization for you. So I hope this argument is clear to everybody. If you remember this one point from my talk, I think you got it. So in Tableau, you know, we, instead of just trying to design one visualization, we actually created like a language for making visualizations. That was the idea, is you had a language. You can make sort of an infinite variety of visualization, and I'm not sure I'm going to have time to give you a demo, but you just make these visualizations by just using a drag and drop interface where you compose a picture that you want to see, and then we fill in defaults to try to make it as easy as possible to interpret. And we do tables because tables are common, and time series and maps because we think those are the ones that are most familiar to people. But the key thing is we can generate all sorts of variety, like this sort of set of scatter plots next to each other for this side-by-side map, because for different tasks, like if you're comparing things, these are much better visualizations. So a lot of, so it's anyway, it's just a language for doing this. And this was very much motivated by Simon's work on about choosing the right representation for the task. And it's somewhat distinctive. A lot of visualization vendors and people try to create these single magical visualizations. They have one sort of special thing that people solve everywhere. So let me skip the demonstration. So I'll just end by just saying that I think really need to spend more time thinking about all the people that use data, not just the most advanced. And that's really the people I'm interested in. I mean, I guess when I've seen computer technology over the years, it always starts out being for the advanced, and then it sort of becomes accessible to everybody. And that's the really fun time when it becomes accessible to everybody. Think of word processing, or even graphics, computer or digital photography. And it used to be something that was really expensive and nobody could do. Now we can all do it But then you have to design your software differently. You have to know who the users are, what their skills are. And I'll claim they're not programmers and not statisticians. So you got to think about that when you write the software. You know, I think everybody will be working with data, and I mean everybody. I mean, I think of like every Excel user. I think Tableau will be bigger than Excel, to be honest, because I don't think everybody does spreadsheets. I think you have to be sort of a financial guy to do spreadsheets. I mean, we sometimes use them for other tasks, but I think in the future we'll have more people using data. Just like, you know, you want to start with something. If you want to start with, like, we used to have drawing programs in graphics, and now we have digital photography. Photography sort of is bigger than drawing programs because you can start with a picture. Think of Tableau as an Excel that starts with some data and then lets you go from there. But we need to teach people how to analyze data in this new world. And what motivates me is to get more people so that they make decisions using facts, which I think is the ultimate goal. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're just going to do sort of a Q&A and take a seat.
Oh,
understand?
I'll stand for now. Yeah, I'll stand for. Thank you. Yeah.
So clearly, whenever you reference Pixar, the burning question anybody has is, what was your favorite character?
in Pixar, Buzz Lightyear.
Nice. Good choice. Any other particular other ones, or?
Well, yeah. We were really into the characters, so it's like, sort of like kids. You know, you can't really quite have a favorite one. You know, you got to sort of like them all. Yeah.
Good stuff. Now, so it's moving on to sort of visualization, Tableau. I mean, has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask? I mean, and obviously, while you just think and talk about it, Mike, go on.
Yeah, I saw on your slide when you're talking about the different stages of analysis. There was a piece about exploring the data set, and you also talked about a structured approach, and exploration naturally got some sort of random exploration in it. And I was just wondering about how you reconcile the two and how you think about that.
I'm a little bit. I think exploration is interesting, but I don't think it's random. It's just a little less structured. Like, for example, when people went to discover like the U.S., they had a reason for getting in these ships and coming over here. When they went to discover the West Coast, Lewis and Clark, and they did explore. I mean, explorers don't randomly. In fact, if you're going to explore, you have to be particularly careful. You can get killed, I mean, and as a researcher, we're always exploring too. And I mostly have to keep my students out of trouble, because they can just go and waste 2 or 3 years and not get anywhere. So I mean, I think you have to. I think people really they don't think through exploration the way they should. I mean, you want to go somewhere that's unknown. You want to try things that have never been tried. But even exploration, I think, is a little more structured than people think. But there's something magical. You still want to sort of discover something that's unexpected. You want to put yourself in a situation to find it. But I think there are skills you can develop for efficiently exploring things. So I think that's sort of an area that's of interest. There's not been a lot of research on that, but I think there's ways of building tools that encourage sort of good exploration.
Great, David.
Yeah, just want to take the example that you used, the table and the bar charts. And based on your experience in software, is there a particular way visualization, when it's presented, tends to get more attention quicker? For example, you had the bar chart and you had the big green bar on the left. Would it be more effective if it was in the middle? Would it be more effective if it was red? Or something like, is there some science behind how you use that to capture?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, put it in the middle helps a little bit, not as much. But the mere fact that we use size is known to be what's called a pre-attentive variable. So you instantly can find the large. So if I were to show you 10,000 bars, you still would have found the first one. So that's an example where you can do parallel processing. Color is another example of that. If we had one red bar and the rest were green, you would find it. So yeah, all those are variables. Where things get really complicated is when you start having more than one variable in play. Then you can start fighting with your attention, and then you can get in trouble. But we can go offline on that. But generally, there's a bunch of known sort of visual, we call them visual encodings or visual representations that are known to be pre-attentive. So you want to use those. Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of, I mean, that's called pre-attentive. I think you're probably also thinking of more subtle attention. Like I would call that more emphasis, or things of that type. So if you want to emphasize the comparison between two things, you should put them right next to each other. I mean that's an emphasis. You still have to go to some effort to compare them, but that will emphasize the thing you want the person to do. So I think an emphasis, I mean, pre-attentive, that sort of like just jumps at you, that's automatic. I think the more subtle attention is more complicated.
Any other questions from the floor? I've just got one question. So if anybody has got a question, just put your hand up. We've got quite a few people here that have started their own businesses. I mean, how hard was it to get Tableau going?
It's really hard. It's really, 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 really hard.
I mean, you're a genius. You're a genius. So surely it would have been easier.
It's really, 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 really hard. But no, I didn't finish. But it's really, 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 really fun.
I mean, I totally understand your pain. I mean, so what was the kind of breakthrough moment? Because obviously you're trying to explain to people in your category and your type of.
Yeah, that was always hard. So just to put it in some perspective, I mean, so my background, I was trained as a physicist, and I learned sort of data analysis when I was in school. My first job was actually doing plots, and this was before we had computer graphics. So I always, I think that when you're in science, you learn quantitative thinking, data analysis. So I was always really interested in that. And when I sort of decided to go back to the university when I left Pixar, I wanted to do something involving graphics that not entertainment based. So I was very motivated to do that. When we started the company, 10 years ago, I actually wrote a paper that you could have called the Big Data Manifesto at the time. I mean, I think I used massive data instead of big data 10 years ago. And literally the people we showed it to just laughed. They said, if you plot from the beginning of time, the amount of data is going up exponentially. It's getting more complicated. This is obvious to everybody. You can't make a business out of this. Life. And then suddenly, I don't know, a couple years ago, I have some theories about what changed, but that fact that I think I know what changed. Several very prominent companies realized that they could extract enormous value from data in ways that haven't been done before, and that really changed our company. So when those companies, the Zyngas, the eBays, the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples, I don't want to leave out ones, but these certain companies, they were defined by their ability to process data, and that became widely known. And I think that was something that wasn't there when we started. A long answer, but that transitional moment several years ago really sort of propelled us from obscurity.
So it's kind of an interesting observation. So I'm just going to leave Apple out, because obviously it's been around for 30 years plus, but the companies that you named weren't really in existence more than 15 years ago.
Right.
So it was pioneers of the internet space, the digital space, that really kind of started to drive the opportunity. Yeah,
but I would say retail, I mean, don't underestimate the retail. I mean, they may have been around for a long time. I mean, there are probably people in retail here, but it's just unbelievable, the analytics. I mean, one of the most amazing things that I found in my time at Tableau as I visited the customers is just how advanced it is. Compared to the sciences, I mean, they're way more advanced than science. And the businesses that sometimes you think are least analytical are actually the most analytical. So retail, I think, is an example of an area where people have been very analytical.
So, is there any questions? Sure. Please.
I just have one question. If you look at the normal user today, they maybe don't understand which chart to use. Are you planning to go in the direction to actually analyze the data and predict which is the best chart?
Well, okay, so that's a great question. I think a lot about that. So we have a feature in our software called Show Me, where if you just collect some collect some fields, and you hit Show Me, it'll automatically choose. So we do that already, and that was because most people, exactly as you say. We also do a lot of other. We choose colors automatically, we choose all sorts of things automatically, And it's not so much that we don't think people know that. We just don't want them spending their time doing that because they should be answering these questions, right? So the more time you're fiddling with colors and other formatting things, the less time you're doing the analysis. So it's not that they can't do it, but we don't want them to spend their time doing it. But having said that, there's three aspects of this problem. I mean, one is you don't know what they're trying to do. I said the best representation depends on what you're trying to do. You can't. That's one of the great challenges in HCI is you don't know what people are trying to do. If you could know what they were doing, you could build much better interfaces. But you can't discover what they're actually trying to do unless they tell you, and they won't. The second thing on patterns, we use a certain amount of pattern. We do some analysis of it, but we don't do as much as we should. I think there's a lot of potential there. If you knew more about patterns in the data, to even choose better.
Okay.
Good question.
Great. One more question from the floor. Dylan.
You said asking the right question is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right at the start of your talk, then everything else to follow. Where do you think we are in the trajectory of machines asking the right questions?
That's a good question. Well, I think a lot of the debate is actually about what's the role of people, and I sometimes in this talk I've actually included the example of Watson, which I think is an unbelievable accomplishment to have that computer play Jeopardy. But no, that Jeopardy, I guess it answers what I'm trying to get. It gave you the answer. That's the question. So I don't think it asked the right question. But I think it's going to be very hard for computers to ask. I mean, and we could get into a long discussion about that. But I think there's just a lot of knowledge about what's important. There's a lot of data that the computers actually don't have. There's a lot of things that are personally of interest to humans that computers might not have. I think that's one reason you need people involved is they want to ask the most important questions. But maybe someday, computers will figure out everything and we can just sit around and
sit on the beach. So just one last question for me as a lead-in to our next segment is you identified retail as a really interesting area of focus. What about healthcare? What about health costs?
Education. I mean, the nice thing about this field is that almost any area, every area of business, every area of science, almost anything we care about can be improved by using that. Okay.
Pat, it's been an honor. Thank you so much. Really. A real privilege. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to move on now, and I'd like to invite David Ng, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer from Prudential Singapore, to come and talk to us about the Prudential Data Innovation Challenge. But before David stands up, we met probably about 9 months ago. I think it's about less than that. Time. I don't know, time goes quickly, I think. But what I was really taken about was David's enthusiasm for this whole space and his deep, passionate interest in healthcare and the future healthcare costs. And it's an issue, it's an area that, yes, it enables people to show their skills and their crafts, but it's something that we're very all emotional about and we all have a vested interest in. So David, if you don't mind, can I welcome you to talk a little bit about Prudential and this challenge? Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Darryl, for the introduction. Yes, we met about six months ago, I think sometime in September last year. We began conversations about what we could do, or how we could collaborate. And I'm very excited to be here this evening. I see a very young and diverse crowd. Don't get up and leave. I'm not here to sell you insurance. But instead, I'm here to talk about something I feel all of us are very passionate about, and something that impacts all of us in many, many different ways. The issue of healthcare and what is it like? Obviously, here, predominantly for people in Singapore, whether the current healthcare model works. Is it sustainable? You look across, you look at different countries, everyone has a different system. How does insurance feature within all of that space? And of late, there has been a lot of press, a lot of government discussions, a lot of dialogue with the citizens and the residents here about this issue of healthcare. So I thought it would be a really good platform, for once to tap on resources outside of the industry, to tap on all your thinking minds to see how we can, as one, come together to hopefully solve some of the issues. How does this work? Okay, I have to introduce Prudential in case you're not aware. We are the British, the UK life insurer, so we're not the Prudential Financial, which is the US company. We're the UK one, we share the same name. We've been in Singapore more than 80 years. We are a leading company here, and the entity in Singapore actually just got our AA S&P rating yesterday. We are one of the market leaders in the provision of healthcare in integrated plan, the MediShield, MediSave approved insurance plans. There are 5 companies that do that, and that plan offers comprehensive healthcare at restructured as well as private hospitals, and that sits on top of the basic government provision, which is known as MediShield. I believe having a good healthcare cover, good healthcare insurance forms the bedrock of any financial plan, any retirement plan you have, because this is the one thing you will use the most when you get old. Okay, contrary to what many people believe, they think they will just get out of bed one day and they will die, or they will meet with an accident and they will die. Unfortunately, that happens maybe less than 5% of the time. Most of the time, the demise preceded by expensive and long illness. That is at least what our data shows us. Okay. Like I said, healthcare is a growing concern for Singaporeans. There's the issue of increasing cost, especially of usage of private facilities, private hospitals. Singapore has become, quite a bit of a medical tourism hub. Many of our neighboring countries, many millionaires that are formed in the region daily come to Singapore to seek its very high quality and relatively inexpensive healthcare. But inevitably, that drives up prices as well. That's been an issue. Right, you would have seen in the newspapers the premiums for the MediShield going up. You will see soon when they introduce MediShield for Life, which is basically universal coverage for all Singaporeans and permanent residents. You will see as a result, premiums will rise as well. Consumption of healthcare kind of stays this way, and when you hit maybe 70, 75, it just goes up, right, exponentially. So, I'm not sure if people have really thought about how we're going to be funding this bit. This bit, I think now we can take care of. But the bit beyond 75 is still a big question mark. So we are trying to put a challenge out there. I mean, we've termed it the challenge to predict the cost of seeking treatment for individuals, therefore enabling them to make better healthcare and financial planning decisions. Some ideas that we have. Can you predict the number of people admitted to hospitals in 2013 based on previous year's data? How can actually some data point of healthcare costs predict further subsequent usage, etc. Now, you've got to understand, insurance companies look and use a lot of data. A lot of it mainly for pricing purposes, mainly on the actuarial side. This is somewhat breakthrough leap of faith for us, right? We seldom share the information we have externally. It's a big, big leap of faith. And I'm hoping with this challenge to actually be able to tap on some of your thinking, right? And naturally, it will be different from ours. It will be out of the box. It will be considerations that we would probably have never even thought about. And hopefully, we can actually collectively solve some of the issues, right? For example, just escalating healthcare costs. Just this big question mark about where should I go? Which doctor should I see? Why is Dr. A more expensive than Dr. B for the exact same treatment? In case you didn't know, right? There is this fee when you go to the hospital called professional charges, and it differs from doctor to doctor, and it can be very different for the exact same treatment, and the doctor with exact same seniority as well. So we're hoping with the data we put out there and with all the work the data scientists or data enthusiasts can come together, we can have some ideas, some resolutions, you know, and something easy for the man in the street. You know, I was discussing this with Daryl, and you know, with the data challenge, I hope to accumulate in the weekend hackathon, where I'm trying not to be too simplistic about this, but perhaps someone can create an app where we can put in every consumer's hand that he or she, wherever they are, can hit that app and then look and says, this is the best place I can go and seek my treatment. Why? Because I don't have to wait very long. That's one issue with hospitals. You go and you take a queue, or because it is the most cost-effective one that the models have predicted. So that will be instantaneously useful for everyone, and I hope something like that will come out of the challenge. The data we will make available will be sample hospital bills. There's kind of 5 data fields here: hospital name, procedures, cost, date of admission, diagnosis. I'm still working through the information, but we will put probably up to 20 data fields available. There's public information that will be made available as well. Things like base occupancy rate, public hospitals, private hospitals, different costs, different specialties, the average inpatient bill tables, etc. And we'll try to work with the Ministry of Health to get more and get richer sets of data out there where we want to look at this. So the deliverables, submissions, we're trying to see if we can get to a predictive model that can be accurate, innovative, help identify some key drivers that are insightful and unprecedented. One of the things I'm thinking of is, you could see in the data a trend, specific trend, an increase in one type of illness, and an increase in the cost of treating that illness. And maybe what we can do, rather than fight that, look at how we can actually prevent, what we can do to prevent this trend from going up, right? Some of the fixes that can be done that could lower the increasing occurrences of such illnesses. And this is, again, a different dimension to understanding the data. So we're looking at the short proposal, some analysis methodology, some insights, some suggestions on implementation, and external research data if applicable. I should tell people how much it is, right? The cash pool is 15,000 Singapore dollars. We will have the most compelling proposals present and hopefully be able to share into that cash pool. So more details will follow. I think we are putting the data live sometime in second week of March. So look out for that space. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is kind of unprecedented that one, I mean, I see people nodding their heads in the room, that a multinational, leading multinational private sector organization taking foot forward and making such data available for both, yes, a competitive business opportunity, but also very much for social good. And this is something that we are deeply, deeply, deeply passionate about, and we're going to be working like nuts to make this a huge success. And I know we have people from the Quantified Self community here, the Health 2.0 community here, representatives from hospitals, research institutes, tool developers, general industry. So, all I can do is I can just ask you, please get involved, because it's such a unique thing. I think it's fair to say we're not intending this just to be a one-off challenge. We're hoping that this can lead into a series of challenges complemented by a series of collabs, hackathons that can actually take these innovative models, algorithms, insights, and convert them into applications and services that can be living and breathing and benefiting Singapore and who knows the world, right? I mean, and Pat, from your perspective, You heard of this kind of stuff going on? Yeah, this is unique. This is world first global stuff leading all out of Singapore. So let's nail it, right? And I really encourage everybody. And again, thank you to everybody for being here this evening to support this wonderful initiative. Thank you again, Dave. Really appreciate it. Okay, now we're on to our final segment. We're on to our final segment this evening. I would like to invite Elle Todd from Olswang. She's the leading partner with deep focus in terms of data and data laws in Asia. And actually, I think Matt described this correctly when he introduced me. You kind of wrote the book, right, on data policy and privacy, one book. So I think, you know, and the fact that you're here in Singapore is fantastic and is highly relevant given, obviously, the introduction of the Personal Data Protection Act and the Commission, etc. here. So what we really wanted to do is we really wanted to ask Elle from her professional consideration just to talk about data privacy, the issues here in Asia, give her perspective on what's going on in Singapore, because it's relevant today and it's significant future. And a lot of us in what we do day in, day out, how we develop these useful applications, algorithms, models, generating use cases for this data, we're all part of the development of this industry. And to understand the law, the implications, and what's possible, what we need to work for, is, I think, super, super important. So again, thank you so much. Please, thank you for hosting us, and we really look forward to your address. Thank you. There you go.
So first, what this talk is not going to be about, so don't think you're going to go away from this having a comprehensive understanding of the PDPA. I don't think anyone's got the appetite for that this evening. Instead, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about why we have data protection laws in the first place, some of the fundamental problems, I think, which exist with them. I think it's okay for the way I have to disagree. And then I'm going to talk about what's happening, some of the trends in Asia, looking at some of the myths, so kind of common misconceptions about data in Asia. And then I'll put the PDPA in the context of that without going through it much detail. So first, data.
Do you mind using the mic?
Oh, sorry. Is that better? Can you hear me now? I hate mic.
It's all right.
So data, that's what it's all about. That's what we're all here to talk about. And I think the key to this image is to remind you that all data law, or data protection law, is only relevant when you're talking about data relating back to an individual. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize here is that actually data protection laws have only really developed since the 1970s. So they're relatively new, and they developed out of a bit of a paranoia with the rise in personal computing. So a lot of it is directly linked to the use of different devices, and that's why it came about. And in the context of data law, it really is incredibly complicated, a bit too complicated in many instances. And it often gets very confused. So data gets linked to privacy, and then privacy gets linked to Snowden and the NSA and state surveillance, and it gets linked to computers and internet and everything. So it gets really covers so many different things. And all of these different elements, unfortunately, have developed at different times and lead for a very confusing spectrum. And they're all going in different directions as well. So you see kind of developments in defamation law, which everyone worries about with the rise of social media. And you see cloud leading to more concerns about transfers of personal data. But it's not all bad. I think, you know, there's some really good stuff happening with data and law as well. So the good stuff, I've seen a real increase in government open data initiatives. So actually thinking, okay, we've got a load of law and restrictions around data, but it is still possible to share data as we're doing here and as Prudential is doing without running contrary to this. So still a lot of sharing of data and trying to work on what can be done. But I think actually there's a real role for self-regulation as well, which hasn't really been taken up by industry in the way I think it needs to be. I mean, the industry needs to lead in terms of setting legislation or procedures which actually work for businesses And I think in that gap of industry not doing too much, we've run into a lot of problems. So the cookies rules in Europe, which I'm sure you've all heard about, is crazy law, which means that every time you use a cookie, you have to consent to it. Really came about because industry didn't respond and say, this is crazy. It kind of almost came in through the back door. But there is some stuff happening, particularly around interactive advertising, but I really think we need to see more. Because otherwise, I think the data laws that we saw developed in the 1970s, as all the technology changes, they stay pretty stagnant, really. And if you look at Europe, there's a current overhaul of the European regime, which is actually where the data laws started, and it's just getting a bit crazier there. So instead of kind of taking out stuff, they're just putting more and more rules in. So more paperwork you have to do, more bureaucracy, up with the fines, more consent, and kind of more into it, rather than thinking about what's really important. So these are the problems, really, I think. And I really put it down to one big problem with data protection law. It all still comes back to the consumer and puts a lot of onus on the consumer. So essentially, data protection laws, like the PDPA, like all those around the world, say, as long as you tell the consumer, you tell the individual what you're going to do with their data, and you get their consent to it, you can do it. But that presupposes that the consumer understands and actually can be bothered to read all those different consent things that they get. So a Microsoft exec actually calculated that if he read all the terms and conditions, privacy policies, consents, notices, tick boxes that he looks at in a year from everything he uses, about 76 days of his life just reading them all. And that was a couple of years ago. I think it's probably gone up since. And which, a consumer organisation, did a study as well, and they kind of did a mock exam, and they used even the execs and lawyers who had written some of these things, and said, what does this mean? What does it mean? You know, these simple questions about what actual consents people were giving. And everybody failed. So that was quite a good sign. But I think it's a real problem, isn't it? Because all the legislation I see coming through in Asia and that we'll look at later still relies upon consent. And I think it becomes, in my view, obviously it's important that consumers know, but it's becoming really, really impractical for them to understand. If you look at the number of complaints that Facebook has got on its terms, and the number of times they've had to change how they do their consent and the different ways, it's still complex. It's still really, really detailed. So what I'd really like to see, I think, is a move away from kind of putting the onus on the consumer and saying, look, let's just tell people that they can't do bad stuff with data. So much like pharmaceutical companies, no one actually reads those slips that you get inside the pill box, but you kind of rely on a sense that the industry is regulated. It's not going to do anything bad. And if it does, you've got some kind of comeback. But anyway, we're stuck with that for the moment, but I think that's where I'd like to see the innovation in data law around that problem. So let's talk about Asia and those myths that I mentioned at the beginning. So these are common things that I found even before I moved to Asia that people said about data protection laws in Asia. So myth number one was, oh well, privacy doesn't really mean anything in Asia. You know, Asians don't worry about privacy. It's not an issue. So you often get this kind of typical, oh, where's that gone? Wasn't me. Didn't like that picture. Yeah. 26. Yeah. So this is the kind of typical preconception that you often have that, you know, privacy is just not a big deal in Asia in the same way. There's almost this sense that you've got a difference between kind of individualistic countries and cultures and more kind of collectivist approach, which of course isn't really the case. I think the thing is each country is different around the world, and data protection and where data laws develop really do depend on those differences. It doesn't mean that privacy isn't something people worry about, but they worry about it in different ways. So one international survey of what individuals in different countries looked at kind of did a survey across Asia, and in Malaysia, for example, 80% of Malaysians who took the survey said their main concern was how companies use their personal data. And if you took that to Thailand, about 4%. Because in Thailand, the main concern was state surveillance. But I don't think you can assume from that that Malaysians only care about companies and the Thais only care about state surveillance. But it's very different, often down to what has happened in a particular year that leads to how people think about things. And then the rapid change really leads to even further difficulties. So it's nuance, but it's not that it's not an issue at all. So, two, a lot of people think that data protection laws really are just a kind of European thing. Europe has a very bad name for data protection, and everyone thinks, oh, why would you want to set up in Europe? They've got crazy data laws. But actually, there's plenty of data laws here in Asia. Here you can see in the green, these are ones where there were comprehensive data protection laws, and in the yellow, where it isn't a data protection law, but you've got lots of other protection. So in Thailand, there's stuff through the constitution, for example. I think what's quite telling about this is, firstly, pretty much everywhere's got something, but you can see that Southeast Asia tends to be a little bit behind some of the others. Obviously, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, very recent new laws. But Southeast Asia tends not to have these comprehensive data protection laws. And I think really it's been very piecemeal again, and you often see certain events leading to the development of little laws rather than one overriding piece of legislation. So an example would be in the Philippines in 2008, there was this national scandal because in a hospital, a surgeon was caught on CCTV doing a rather delicate operation on an individual, and it was filmed on CCTV, and it went viral, and the surgeons were just laughing at this individual while they were performing the surgery. So that then led to national outcry and the development of a very specific hospital CCTV Data Act. So very, very specific. And you actually see a lot of that happening around Asia. So it's responding to a particular concern from people, which happens over time. But really, why we're seeing all these new comprehensive data laws is about economics. It's because there is now so many countries around the world which have data protection laws that if you don't, it's no longer a good thing. So it used to be, probably about 15 years ago, clients used to come to me and say, where can we set up our data-rich business which doesn't have data laws? That would be really good. And so you'd say, well, you don't want to go here, you don't want to go here. This place doesn't really have very many. Now it's very different. So most clients will say, where has strong data laws? Because that's where I want to set up, because that shows my customers and my clients that I care. And if I can fulfill those high requirements, then actually that's better for my business. And it's been a real turnaround. And of course in Asia, there's a response to that. Singapore has a very new Data Protection Act, as you know, coming into force in July. And it's exactly responding to that need that if you're going to attract data-rich companies, you now have to have that regulation in force. And particularly as data is transferred around the world, if you're the one country who doesn't have it, then actually it can really, really badly affect you economically. So a lot of it's economic. I'm not going to go through that, but that's to show you some of the key new laws which we've seen just developing around the region. That is just the new stuff. Many other countries have been doing a lot more. The one I would pick out there to worry about is South Korea. It does stand out because in South Korea they have a rather different approach. And actually many would say that it's probably the most strict regime in terms of data protection and enforcement than many other. Which gets me onto the last myth. So there's all these laws, but they're all economically led. You don't need to worry about them, you can just ignore them. So obviously, this is the kind of thing lawyers tend to point out. They'll say, jail, 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 fines, $1 million, really bad, be careful. And And it's true, if you look at most of this legislation, somewhere in it, it'll have big penalties, because otherwise, why bring in a law unless you can't tell people, you know, and enforce it? In reality, if you look around the world at what happens with enforcement, it's not that it doesn't happen, it's just that it happens in relation to some specific things which really matter. Most of the jail, the massive fines, is down to theft of data, real negligence in relation to data, and particularly on the fines front, it's security. So it's the banks which don't have proper security processes, and they just, you know, someone goes home with a laptop and it's left on the MRT and it has loads of client data. That's where you get big fines. But often it's combined with the regulator as well. So in most parts of the world, the financial services regulator actually slaps more fines on companies than the data commissions. So I'm not saying you don't need to worry about it. I'm just saying I think you need to put it in context. I think there's far too much scaremongering about data, usually because lawyers want to make some money out of it. And you have to put it in that context of it is practical and it's trying to be proactive and it's economically motivated. So let's go on to Singapore, which I think is a prime example of an act which, yes, follows the precedent, which I think is flawed and won't work and is impractical and we don't like it. However, it's actually relatively pragmatic in terms of not going so far on additional consent requirements, not having too much bureaucracy, and not having, you know, it's just not too draconian, it's practical. So a really quick overview. As you know, it's in two parts. You've got the do not call, which was in already, and then you've got the general data protection stuff, which comes into force in July. And you've got this new commission set up, so it's a new regulatory body. And I would say so far, I've only got positive things to say about the commission as far as I've seen them. So they seem to be very practical, they listen. The whole point of this is not about stifling innovation, stopping the kind of things which we all want to do, but just saying, let's be sensible about it. I think the biggest problem at the moment is it's quite a high level piece of legislation, and there's not much of a guidance around it to say what you need to do. So I think the main problem is just there are gaps which leads to uncertainty, rather than the fact that the actual provisions are crazy or over the top or silly. But let's just go back to the beginning. So I said you only need to worry about this stuff if it relates back to an individual. So it's a thing called personal data. Well, what do we mean by personal data? Let's do a quick test just to give a feel for when you need to worry about these. So a name, do you think that's personal data? Probably. So yeah, it's going to be one of those, I'm afraid. So yeah, probably. A name you would think automatically leads back to an individual, but many names are incredibly common, aren't they? So the standard example, you know, in the UK is, you know, what if it's Joe Bloggs? What if it's a John Smith? Is that really personal data? It could be, but it could be actually hundreds of thousands of people you just don't know. So often it would need to be combined with something else. Email address, Twitter username, social media username? Yes. Probably. So again, it depends. So in most parts of the world, we don't have the real name requirement, which was, you know, heavily debated in China. So it would depend often what the particular handle you're using or social media name is. Obviously, some social media channels now do try and require you to personally identify yourself, but not all. So it would depend who can see that information, and can they pair it with something else to really link it back to you as an individual. Information about employees. No one wants to answer now because I know it's going to be probably, don't they? Actually, the answer is yes on this one, so it's more straightforward. Yeah, there's a bit of confusion as to whether employees are in or out of the Act here. They're in. There are some exemptions and things, but even if you're not using consumer data, you still need to worry about the PPA. Work phone number? Depends. So So a work phone number. So on if I gave you my business card, or the fact that my phone number is on my website, and you contacted me about work, then that's fine. You can use it. However, the fact of my work email address does not mean I can be spammed with loads of marketing messages. So there's a bit of, and this is why I say it's actually quite common sense, the way the Act is being designed, but it's not hard and fast and clear either side. There's a bit of a kind of judgment call that you need to apply. And usually the test I apply is, would I be irritated by this? And then that's usually quite a good standard. What about information about a marketing campaign? Depends, doesn't it, on that one. So what does the data show? Can you relate it back to individuals? So that might mean in some person's hands, if you're using, an analytics company to do the analysis for you around the campaign, they may not have been given the personal information, but for you, you may be able to link it back. So a good example is, with IP addresses, for example, in the hands of me, all your IP addresses without knowing who you are, it's not going to be personal data, because I'm not likely to link it back to you. But to Singtel, because I've got all your account details, it's going to be personal data. They can link it back. But it does make it quite complex. Again, I think you just got to think practically, but for a lot of you who are doing data sharing campaigns and thinking about that, it really is that data in and of itself may not seem to be personal data, but who can link it back to other data is an important question. On the other hand, with some of these, you can see that a lot of data that you think, oh gosh, yes, that's caught, I have to be really careful. No, you can often, it isn't caught at all, or there are things that you can do to make it anonymous and mean that it's not caught. You don't need to worry about it at all. It's always good. Quickly, some best practices, just so you go away knowing something about the PDPA. So yes, it's the get consent again. That's the key for most things. And then, if you look through all these things, they're quite sensible, aren't they? I mean, if you're designing what someone should do in relation to personal data, those are the kind of things you put down. So only use them for the purposes that the person gave them to you for, telling people what you're going to do, letting people access and correct it, making sure it's accurate and complete, and security, which I think is probably the biggest issue to think about. Not keeping it longer than is needed, and this issue of transferring outside of Singapore. That this is one issue that, again, a lot of people get confused about because there's not the detail from the Commission yet on it. But of course, it can't be the case that Singapore is not going to let any personal data outside of Singapore. That would be crazy. That just wouldn't work. It would be contrary to the business purposes. But you do need to be careful about it. And an additional complication in Singapore, you have to have a data protection officer appointed and make sure that anyone you give data to looks after it and does all those things. So I mean, it can really be boiled down into those 10 points, really. Not so bad. So some closing thoughts. Just wanted to emphasise that this is not something to be really worried about. I think it's flawed, yes, but that's a bigger issue. But really, it's not intended to make business more difficult or to change the way you do business. There are important things you need to do, yes, but I think a lot of them are common sense, and they're usually good for business anyway. So there's no reason to stop innovating. I think the key thing. It should not be a barrier. Another thing to think about, but not a barrier. Thank you.
Great. We've got time for some questions, right? Cool. Last question. So you're basically pointing out to us it's about being sensible, common sense, not getting tied up in knots over something. So, I mean, I don't know about, I'll just take a quick sample from the room, but I mean, I found that very useful because that gave me some reassurance about what we're doing. And the message was, as long as you're responsible, you behave appropriately, you can get a lot done. That's correct. So how can we help companies become more comfortable Is it more workshops, capacity building sessions? Is it more prototyping weekends? Is it more competitions like this, just generating use cases? And what can we do as an industry, as a group of people, to encourage more understanding, openness, use of this data to innovate?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. As I said, I think to get these things right, industry needs to lead it, because industry actually understands its market far better than anyone else, better than a regulator. I think the problem at the moment is that it's seen as a chore and something that people need to engage a lawyer just to do an audit, and they're put in place a load of documents, and people think they're fine, tick the box, move on. But it is a bit of a cultural shift, I think, in thinking about these things. And the more we talk about it and don't just think of it as something scary and something that is a financial expense, basically, to do, then I think, yeah, that's very helpful, because then it becomes normalised. And hopefully, my big hope, do actually end up having solutions to people's genuine concern about personal data, which aren't as unworkable as this in the long term.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Just say your name as well.
Hi, I'm Jasper. I have a question about one of the best practices you shared, which was the fact that data should not be stored longer than needed. How does that tie in with, a lot of businesses nowadays rely on data and monetize data, basically, that is not always needed. So how do those two reconcile?
Yeah, it really it's one of those things that it seems common sense, but the problem is there's only that statement in the Act and the detail isn't there. So an independent assessment by each person needs to be made on what is sensible. Actually, for most companies, there usually are other reasons that they need to keep data. Common ones are accounting rules, contract limitation periods, and particular requirements of their individual regulator, which mean that actually some of the data storage requirements are very long, and longer than actually from a business perspective you think you need them for. But yeah, there is that assessment, and I think it's not that you suddenly say no personal data, but it's that, again, thinking, do I need all this data? Are there bits I could anonymize? Are there bits I no longer need? And what is the need, really? Is it purely commercial? And did I explain to the consumer? Again, it's back to that test of the consumer. Would a consumer expect 15 years on me to still have this data? Sometimes, yes, they may well do, particularly, I think, in the context of free services. But it's hard. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's judgment. And that's why they're talking about it and seeing what works for different industries and sharing that knowledge, I think, would be really helpful.
Any other questions? Okay.
Hi, I'm Kancham. My question is about social media. Typically, when we say social media monitoring or listening, we gather a lot of data about social media. And always there's a confusion between us and customer that, is it private data? Is there any data privacy relevant to this? If yes, in what sense?
And there's actually quite a difference between the US approach that actually Singapore's followed on this compared to Europe. So in Europe, they would say data, even if it's publicly available, so even if it's on my Facebook page that I've made available to the world, then you can't use it just because something's publicly available. In the US, it's completely the opposite. So if you make it available, fair game to a certain extent, depending on different sectoral rules. And Singapore has followed more of that approach, actually. But then it depends, doesn't it, on the settings as well. So, if you use the settings for your account to set it to a limited group, then it's not publicly available. It's only to those limited people. But if you've decided that you're going to add your boss as a friend, then, you've kind of made that decision. So it's putting some of the onus back on the consumer. I think that's one thing the Commission is definitely going to do, is more of that kind of education to consumers about the use of their personal data and what to do with it. But you've got more ability to use the data. So it means particularly for employers doing checks, which is very common, and checking on social media. That would be pretty tricky in many parts of Europe, doing that. But actually here, if it's publicly available, genuinely publicly available, it's publicly available. It can be used. Waved it.
We heard about it. I don't think what's available.
Yeah, I mean, it really does vary in different parts of the world. And again, you know, there may be legal reasons why you're fine to do it, but does it make sense for you? You know, is it going to annoy your customers? Is it going to annoy your employees? So I think with many of these things in the world of marketing, there are so many things you could do, but you choose not to do because ultimately it's not worth it because you're annoying the people you want to work with.
Great. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. Thank you so much for that. So questions from the back.
Hi, Abdul. My question is, what are the considerations and provisions in regards to where and how the data is being used and where it's actually stored? Because now with cloud services and stuff like that, the data is most probably stored somewhere else, possibly in a different country entirely. So if you're doing business in Singapore and data is stored somewhere else, in the US, for example, what are the considerations?
Yeah, this is where, from a PDPA perspective at the moment, there's not enough detail around how they're going to allow transfers of data to be made. So you can only draw kind of sense from many of the suggestions and what works in other countries as well. So it's believed at the moment that entering into a contract with, say you're using, you know, you've got your servers provided by a third party in the US. Your contract with them should address the transfer of data. Essentially, the whole point is to make sure that wherever you're transferring it to provides the same kind of adequacy rules as you would have in Singapore. And this is exactly why so many countries are developing data laws, because they want to be seen as adequate. You know, Singapore wants to be on the whitelist of countries that Europe has, which says, fine, yeah, you can send to Singapore, no problem. But we're not quite at that stage yet. So at the moment, yeah, there's a bit of uncertainty. I think practically, you're using a third party, such as, you know, an AWS service, for example. You ask them, you know, they're the guys who are providing the service to you, and you say, what are you doing to make sure that I'm not in breach of the PDPA? You put the onus back on them. There are usually ways around it, and of course, cloud isn't as simple as, oh, that means data's anywhere in the world at any one time. There are so many different types of cloud service. You know, a bank, for example, because it has MAS requirements as well, they would make sure that if they're using a cloud provider, actually they do know where the data is located. So it's a cloud service, yes, but they actually have some transparency as to where it is. But yeah, it's the big area which needs to be cleared up. Are there going to be whitelist countries? Is it going to be a model contract? How's it going to work in practice? At the moment, the best solution is contracts, really, and making that assessment carefully.
Great, thank you. The last question of the evening from over here.
Hi, Al. My name is Matt. I have a question with regard to whether there's a view in kind of the prevailing jurisdiction, not necessarily in Singapore, just in general, as to whether or not a data set can go from a point where it is not personally, it doesn't allow you to personally identify anyone, but it grows to an extent where you can actually infer who someone is. And I think a good example on this would be browser fingerprinting, right? Which is a way of taking many small pieces of data, which individually don't really mean much, but you put them together, and in aggregate, they do allow you to uniquely identify a device in this case, right? What is the view on that particular problem?
I mean, you're absolutely right, is a real problem, and it's not that something starts off as personal data and then is always personal data, or vice versa, something starts as not personal data and can never become personal data. It's very fluid, and it depends by that increase in information in the hands of a person who can then link it back to the individual. So if that information is with lots of different people, those different companies or people may not be able to link it back. But if one company has all that information, then yes, they may well get to a point where suddenly they can do more. I mean, it is why it becomes such a problem with the data laws generally, because the volumes and obviously the expertise of data analytics now means that you can find out so much from stuff which seems seemingly to be anonymous. I mean, Pat will know this better than I, but there are many analysts at universities in the States who do just that. So they will go out onto the web, they'll find information relating to cinema goers, for example, and they end up, when you combine it with other information, forming huge personal profiles about people because they just keep digging away until they can make that link. So in a way, I think it almost encourages people to be a bit dumb deliberately, to try not to go too much further, because as soon as you get to that point of making the link, you're almost at the point of no return. It can be dangerous, which I think is, problematic. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That can definitely happen.
Great, thank you very much. It's been brilliant. Really appreciate it. Round of applause, please. So, well, it's 8:30. We're finished. I think I'd just actually like to thank all of the three speakers, Pat, David, Elle, for a fantastic, informative session and a really exciting data innovation challenge. So thank you, David, Prudential, for this. But can I just have a round of applause, a big thanks for everybody. So now please feel free to hang around, say hi to everybody, do a bit of networking. If you've got any questions, please grab and have a chat. I would just like to thank the team from Newton Circus for the wonderful job, the Dextra team in particular, Joelle and Justin, for wonderful work. I'd also like to encourage everybody, if you haven't been to the Facebook page or the website, you can just put the slide up, basically just please do check that out. I think what I've learned from this evening is that we're probably going to do another dedicated workshop on all of this sort of data privacy, use of data, which I think would be really worthwhile. So again, please chat. Thank you so much for coming. It's really appreciated. You'll hear over the next week, 2 weeks, all about the Data Innovation Challenge Prudential. And let's just get going. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.